Welcome everybody to the AlgaTalk podcast, the show about algae. We talk about algae of different colors, kinds, and species. And of course by we, I mean my friend and co-worker and algae enthusiast, Jack Luntz.
Nice to be here.
And yours truly, Ivan Hilov. So today, we're gonna make another trip in our algae time machine that we used last time. And I see, Jack, that you've brought some more algae fuel.
Yeah, algae biofuel.
Yeah, biofuel. So previously we made a trip back into history using our algae time machine. It was a trip deep into human history, to Japan and then Rome and then Chad in Africa and then into
the conquistadors finding that the Aztecs were collecting algae from the lakes there that they had. And what I've been doing lately, and I stole the algae time machine for a while and did my own research.
Oh, really? Did you? I didn't notice.
Well, I made another copy of the keys, so you don't. Well, now you know. But I found a very important person to phycology, which is the study of algae. Some even call him the father of phycology. His name is Dawson Turner. He is one of the most prolific scientists in classifying and collecting algae.
All right, that sounds very interesting indeed. So where do we go to find him?
Well, we have to go back to the 17th century, the end of the 17th century. He lived Yarmouth, England. He lived from 1775 to 1858, and he starts to research around even the area that he lives and starts to collect things. This was a sort of hobby back then for a lot of people, and this was the way they kind of passed the time.
All right, so my question right here would be, when you call him, or many people call him the father of phycology, what was the state of phycology back then? Was there a phycology science at all? Can you please enlighten me in this way?
Well, during this time, science is being researched, and phycology by its name, as we call it nowadays, phycology, the study of algae, wasn't named yet. People were still categorizing things, and I have to take you a little bit farther back in our algae time machine if we're going to talk about Dawson Turner, and we have to talk about, in 1676, about Antony von Leeuwenhoek, who is, most people call him the father of microbiology, and he uses something that had just been created, the microscope. He was a merchant at the time and actually used it to try to look at organisms inside his garments and different merchandise. He sort of by accident comes across organisms that are single-cellular, and he becomes the father of microbiology, and that's very important because the study of microorganisms wasn't that big back then, and like I was just explaining, nothing was really categorized yet. And for us to go even, a little bit more forward, we're gonna have to get back in our algae time machine real quick and go to Carl von Linnean, who is the father of taxonomy. Now, taxonomy is the classification of animals and plants, and everything that we know in life, and microbiology, which wasn't called back then also, we start to classify all the animals and plants that we're finding in nature.
Okay, so he actually was the first one to start this classification, or was he the first one to come up with some kind of system?
So Carl von Linnean is Swedish, and during that time he's part of the Swedish Royal Science Society, and he creates the taxonomy, the classification, and from that point on, many scientists use this, call it the Linnean system, which is the classification of all these plants and animals, which is very important to algae because later on algae gets classified into its own group that it shares with mosses, fungi, and ferns.
Okay, a quick question here. Do we know who was the first one to put this into the system?
The first one to put the Linnean system?
No, to put algae into the Linnean system.
Linnea himself.
Oh, right. Okay.
He's categorizing, and during this time, they're trying to figure out the classifications.
Mm-hmm.
He made classifications, and they're finding different species of different plants and animals, and they're categorizing them. They're naming them, and even around Europe, they're finding algae all everywhere for them to be able to name and classify. And as they keep doing this, the groups start to show themselves. They start to see similarities between different species. So they're able to group them into one category.
Okay. So, Dawson Turner, who wasn't the first one to start collecting, so I understand, right?
Correct. During this time, many scientists had been studying algae throughout Europe in the 18th century, during this whole time. And most of these were macroalgae, not micro, which would be microbiology. Macroalgae that we know as seaweed and kelp and the like, things that wash up on the shore around Europe. And during this time, throughout Europe, because of this Enlightenment period, people were collecting, examining, and trying to figure out where to put them in the Linnean system. And actually, even Dawson Turner has a part in this. He's also studying algae around Britain, around where he lives, and he publishes his first work, which is a synopsis of British Phycology, which it makes him famous almost.
Which is basically the collection of all the algae species that are living in Britain.
Not all, but as they're collecting, they keep on collecting. They still haven't gotten into microalgae, and so they still haven't even touched the surface yet, but they're starting to touch the surface, which is the important part.
All right, so as we talk about him as one of the, or maybe the father of phycology, I would like to know a little bit more about him in terms of his work, because as you mentioned, there were others, but his name kind of stands out in this context.
His name does stand out for what he was doing. Now, what he was doing was collecting all the different algae that was being found around the world, and he's part of the Linnean Society of London, which is has a major influence on algae research in general.
Did Carl von Linne create the society, or is it just organized around him, or was it
it's
called
organized
Linnean
around
Society?
the system?
But
the Linnean system is the concept of taxonomy and classification.
So the Linnean Society, he didn't start the society.
No.
So it just...
It's based off of his work.
Okay, so...
that's why he's the father of taxonomy and classification.
Right, so...
They're doing expeditions across the world, not only to find algae, to find anything they could find, and examine, and put a Latin name to it that we can't pronounce to this day. Only scientists can. They're going around and they're finding all this stuff, and the Linnean Society is very important, and Dawson Turner is a part of the Linnean Society. So he's part of this scientific group that is trying to discover everything. And Dawson Turner, by choice or by just destiny, is specifying an algae specifically.
I have one more question in this context. I'm sure our listeners might have this question as well. Dawson Turner, was he a scientist by origin?
Well,
did he study to become a scientist?
By origin, he's a banker. Many of these people were, like we even talked about, Antony von Leeuwenhoek was a merchant. All these people had day jobs. Let's call them day jobs. Things that they made them money. They were pretty well off. And as a hobby, they didn't have iPads or, the internet back then. So they had hobbies. Some were botanists, zoologists, even physicians would get into this. The Linnean system expanded everybody's minds to now start to name their own things that they could find. It was almost like a Pokemon game. Catch them all. They wanted to catch every species of everything that they could.
Well, this reference is a little bit over my head. I'm not that into Pokemon, but what
you should get into it.
maybe. But first, I want to make this record straight with Dawson Turner. So, is it correct that we can call him, with all due respect, a kind of an amateur scientist?
Sure.
From the get.
They all were, enthusiasts. It was their hobby. They were enthusiastic about the hobby. And they were very well educated, coming from good backgrounds.
Yeah.
So they were able to read and all this kind of stuff. So they were able to learn about different things and be able to connect all the dots. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they were amateurs, but during that time, even let's say the beginning of any discovery or science.
Why do people call him the father of phycology?
He was the one that produced the largest collection of algae during his time. He was able to
When was that?
Around 1800.
Okay.
About 1790 to about 1820. Mm-hmm. And he gathered all this algae from around the world and was able to put it together, name different species of algae, and put them into plates. He had one of the largest plate collections by the end of his life.
How did he work on
conduct his research? And
well, yes, like collecting things, and because I understand we wouldn't call him the father of phycology for nothing.
Well, I don't know if he would even call himself the father of phycology, because he was, like we were talking about, he's amateurish or enthusiast, hobbyist. So for him, he's finding a new field. He's discovering something new that later on will be called phycology. He would never have thought that he could have been so influential in this field, or that even this field would ever exist.
That was the question I was going to ask you, because for folks at home, Jack brought some pictures with him, and I understand that those are one of those plates that he had.
Absolutely.
So those look like paintings or drawings.
Correct.
Of algae.
Yeah, that's how they would do it. A lot of these people would be on expeditions. They'd bring it back, and they would do their research on the specimens that came in, and they would draw on glass plates to keep it, for the future. And many people were helping him out with this, and even strangely enough, his daughters were a part of putting these plates together.
Well, we're talking about Dawson Turner, right?
We're talking about Dawson Turner's
Turner's daughters.
Daughters, that's correct.
Okay.
It's a bit of a tongue twister. Dawson Turner's
for
daughters.
the record, that photography wasn't that much around.
It wasn't around.
I'm not sure if that the technology wasn't around, but I think it wasn't that of a popular technology
Correct.
to use to take photos of algae,
thing,
right? So they had to draw them
by hand.
By hand themselves. That is also a very interesting turning point that he used. That actually family members helped him in his research.
And he's the only scientist that I see so far, at least, using the Algae Time Machine, so far that is teaching his daughters that science is for everybody. That you can be a scientist. And he's teaching them how to draw these plates, and many of the plates that exist to this day are drawn by his daughters that he helped teach this science to.
Did anyone of his kids become a scientist in biology or any others?
It did lead to one of his daughters marrying a man named William J. Hooker, who is very influential in botany in general, but for us specifically algae. He is somebody that was very much involved with Dawson Turner very involved with the research that he was doing. He was almost a family member before he became his son-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And in future times, he becomes the first director of Kew Gardens, the Botanical Gardens of London.
All right. When you say he was involved, any specific role he played?
Well, these plates that we were talking about, he collects them, afterwards, and puts them into the botanical gardens. He archives them, but he archives many other types of algae from all over the place. He even has a friend that we will get into later, W.H. Harvey, which is also possibly one of the fathers of phycology. And W.H. Harvey, in my opinion, learned from Dawson Turner, who William H. Harvey was also part of the Linnean Society.
Okay,
surprise,
no
surprise.
Well,
exactly. So he continues what I would say. W.H. Harvey continues the work of Dawson Turner.
Amazing. I like the idea of this amateur start that nowadays we have the whole science called phycology with everything that's in it nowadays, with all this information and data, that it started almost with amateur people with no specific education.
It's got to start somewhere.
Yes, it's got to start somewhere, but it also gives this almost an intimate human touch that almost everybody can do that.
Correct.
Even nowadays.
That's what I took from this as well, was look at these guys that are just starting out, trying to work with a blank piece of paper, and they start this whole, I would call it a revolution of science.
Right. It also resonates with me because back in my day I was trying to do some research work, and oh my God, nowadays it's so hard to do. Because you got to be
and they didn't have Google.
You got to be professional. Yeah, they didn't have Google. That's right.
Even me trying to research and trying to look different things up on Google, I type in phycology, it takes me straight to psychology.
I wonder why.
Not even Google knows about phycology.
That's for sure. So, was he? We get back to Dawson Turner.
Sure.
Did he spend all
the man of the hour?
Right, the man of the hour. Did he spend all his life researching this topic? Did he commit all his life to this?
Well, that's what's very interesting about him, is that it seems as if he quits. He sort of goes on to something else. That's why maybe some people would say maybe he's not the father of phycology. Maybe he's just doing it as a hobby. But he is very important to future research. But he starts to look at antiquities of Normandy. He starts collecting letters. He just finds, it seems like during this time, you find a new video game, or you find a new video to watch, or some kind of new hobby. This is what they were doing. He wanted to look into something else.
So what happened to his collection?
His collection was collected by William J. Hooker.
Oh, okay.
And put into the botanical gardens, and his daughter still has a major effect because she's married to William J. Hooker. He has a major effect because of W.H. Harvey later on, who is another father of phycology. He's a very important. That's why I think he didn't even realize how important he was to the study of phycology.
Right, and thanks to his son-in-law that all this collection from all over the world didn't vanish into the abyss of time.
That could be why he's called Sir William J. Hooker.
Not only because of that, I suspect.
I think he had some good political ties, yeah.
Those are the ways of the science and back in the 19th century, I guess, or the 18th century. There were no research institutions, there were no particular professional scientists. Even, daughters of those hobbyists played
helping
some
them out,
role.
yeah.
You know, thanks to them for those old pictures that scientists can see now and look, and check for reference or whatever, and just it's part of the history of this science. They also made this input, and this is an amazing personal story and a journey into someone's that's significant in the history of the science, because from the get-go, when you talk about someone who is called the father, you imagine someone who was really, I would say, very charismatic. Or maybe he was a genius. Maybe he was a big name in the science before that. And here we have almost a complete amateur hobbyist who was just interested.
Normal guy, yeah.
A normal guy like you and I. And here we are talking about him. And I understand that maybe, as you said, there is this criticism that he's not original, like father of the science, because he didn't realize and he didn't continue working, and
Correct.
as it happens sometimes when we learn about some topic. But I think we still should give him some credit into that, because
Absolutely.
Just from the story that you told us today, it's amazing how all these things got together. I suspect, in looking at our algae fuel meter, I suspect this is what we have left in our tank for today.
Yeah, it looks like we're at empty here.
Yes, and just before
I thought I had brought enough.
Well, that is more than enough.
We gotta go to W.H. Harvey next.
That was a good ride. Thank you very much. And yes, we gotta stop here. And once you get the biofuel for the next ride, where will we go? Give us some kind of a cliffhanger here.
Well, we're gonna go into the other fathers of phycology after this important person, Dawson Turner. There are others outside of England, and going on further of the fathers of phycology, and not only the fathers but also the mothers of phycology.
Oh, even the mothers of phycology.
The influence of Dawson Turner in teaching his daughters doesn't stop with the daughters.
Okay, that sounds great. It sounds very exciting. So until next time, we say goodbye to you.
Keep algae listening, and we'll keep algae talking.
Right.